Hi, welcome back to Nuanced Insights and More with myself, JB Navari. I'm so excited that you're catching yet another episode of Nuanced Insights and More. This is the second installment on the leadership series that I did the first one a few weeks ago, and we posted that where I just basically outlined what this series is all about and what I'll be trying to achieve through this conversation. And the feedback has been quite amazing on the content from that episode. And I'm glad that you're actually back for another episode on the leadership series. The title of the series is Leadership Essentials. The heart of it really is just to go back to the basics of leadership. Sometimes we think we are so advanced, and sometimes we really do get advanced, but we miss the little and fundamental things about leadership. And I thought let's have this conversation that we don't throw away what I believe are the fundamentals of leadership, so that our leadership is strong, long, and effective. So, on the previous episode, I outlined what I called the 5 stages of the leadership life cycle. The whole idea behind that was to break leadership into different compartments where we can have meaningful conversations at every stage of leadership. Because one of the observations that I had made in my own leadership journey was that there are so many scattered leadership principles, and some of them really they come true, they come nicely articulated, but outside of a proper context and a proper appropriation, there's a risk that it may frustrate the leadership journey for an individual. I'm actually convicted that this thing works in a life cycle. It's a journey, and almost all principles and every principle about leadership has a space and a context at which it will apply without any reservations. And the 5 stages in the leadership life cycle, or the pediatrics of leadership, the juveniles of leadership, the adolescents of leadership, maturity and multiplication, and the last one was legacy. So, on this episode, I will be double clicking on some of the few principles that I think are relevant when we look at the pediatrics of leadership, which I believe are the formative years of your leadership. In here we find the very basic and the very fundamental concepts of what makes leadership. And I'll be going into that. Not necessarily gonna be able to share all the principles that I think are relevant in this space, but what I'm going to share I think is fundamentally important, and it should be beneficial for you as we reflect on leadership. In the previous episode, I did give a definition that I somewhat have crafted, trademark. This is my definition on what I think leadership is. And it goes: leadership is the capacity to generate an effect that causes someone or something to be better. That's what I've come to believe leadership to be. And I do acknowledge that there are many other definitions of leadership that do capture what leadership is all about. And I think we'll hardly get to that one definition that encapsulates everything that leadership has to do. But when we take the various body of work from various leaders, we're in a position to get a much fuller appreciation of what leadership is. And this is my take. But on that definition for this episode, I want to focus on the choice of words in the definition, and I want to look at the first operative word in the definition. Leadership is the capacity to generate an effect. I want to zone in on the concept of capacity. Why is it that I think leadership has to do with capacity? Why am I not going for the word ability? Why am I not going for the word skill? Why specifically the word capacity? And I think so because capacity is a word that we use regularly on our day to day, and it simply refers to the maximum amount that something can contain, hold, or produce, right, at any given moment. So if you take a bucket, You have a 5 liter bucket, you've got a 10 liter bucket, you've got a 20 liter bucket. Once you have a 5 liter bucket, you have communicated the capacity of that bucket as to how much of water or how much of anything can that bucket be able to contain, and you speak of its capacity. Another example, let's probably look at. I do have some love for cars, but I'm not really a fanatic. But when we go into the car space and engine sizes, we then go into the conversation on engine output. How many kilowatts does this car or does this engine produce? I'm not going to shade on any car, but I actually have a car on my mind now. You find that your engine probably produces 40 kilowatts, and you have some nicer cars that will give you 250 kilowatts output, 400 kilowatts output. But that's basic. When you are having that kind of conversation, you are working around the confines of what capacity is. But I think with the two examples that I've given you, we can see that sometimes when we speak of capacity, we speak about capacity from an input point of view, where we are looking at what can we put in to a vessel, what can we put into a bucket, and that determines the capacity of that very thing. But on the flip side, when we look at a car, for example, we talk capacity, not measuring what we can put in, but what we can get out of a particular object. So capacity works on both ends, both input and output. And that's the thinking that I think plays in leadership. When we speak capacity in the leadership conversation, we're not just looking at input, but we're also looking at output. It's a conversation that comes from both ends. When we speak of capacity in terms of leadership, I'm thinking at a pediatric level, how much can you take as a leader? How much can you take in as a leader? How many lessons can you take in as a leader? How many new learnings can you take as a leader? This is in the basics of leadership. Your leadership is geared for good progress when you access a space, and the rate at which you learn and the rate at which you can take in information is larger and quicker and much more efficient as compared to when you can only take so much. On the flip side, let's look at what you can produce. Let's look at the sphere of influence. How wide is your sphere of influence when you speak of your leadership? Let's look at how excellent are your results. How excellent is your output? That's the capacity I'm talking about when I speak of capacity in the conversation of leadership. It's on both ends. One other thing that I think also plays when you speak of capacity, it's almost static when we use it commonly. A 5 liter bucket is a 5 liter bucket. And if you want to put in anything that's more than 5 liters, get a 10 liter bucket. A 40 kilowatt car is a 40 kilowatt car. You'll have to do a change down when you go through a steep place. That's what you get. But when it pertains to leadership, I don't think leadership capacity should be taken as static. It's limiting as a leader when what you can do today is all you can do tomorrow. I think in leadership, capacity must be elastic. As a leader, you must push yourself to be elastic. What do I mean? I mean, what you're able to take in today, tomorrow you must be able to take in twice as more than you could today. So the operative word there is that as a leader, you must grow. You must grow in what you can take in. You must grow in what you can learn. You must grow in the rate at which you learn. But at the same time, you must grow in your sphere of influence. You must grow in what you are responsible for. You must grow in what you are capable of. So real life example, elasticity in leadership allows us to be able to come to terms with the reality that a spaza owner today can be a CEO of a multinational grocery store tomorrow, right? Because leadership is elastic. Your capacity is elastic. And in your leadership journey, we are really expecting that you must place yourself and allow yourself to be elastic and to be stretched. So you must be able to hold on more tomorrow than what you are able to do today. A cell leader must be able to be a mega church pastor at some point. That speaks to the elasticity of the elasticity of leadership. One might just be a prefect at school. It should be possible that you can move from being a prefect at school and one day you are a minister, you are a president, you are a mayor, whatever the case is. That's a typical display of the value proposition of elastic capacity when it pertains to leadership. You might be entering a company as an intern or as a graduate. The idea of elastic capacity in leadership says you don't have to end an intern. You can actually be the CEO of a multinational company one day. And that is made possible because capacity in leadership is elastic. We expect you to take in more, to learn more, to do more, to handle much more pressure, to handle more people, to be able to lead bigger teams, to be able to be able to be responsible for bigger numbers, for bigger targets. And I think that's the thinking that informs why I think leadership is, for me, is more of a capacity, because it can be stretched, it can be honed, it can be grown, and we see a leader emerging to be bigger than what they started out as. And then the other operative function, which I think I'll touch in the coming episodes, it's this, what I call generating an effect. I will not touch on that much today, but it's this ability to be able to cause movement around you, that then causes things to be better, that causes people to be better. It's operative, but I think I'll double click on this more as we go along the series. But I think for me, the heart of where the definition of leadership lies, it's on the last part of this definition, which says something or someone must be better. The highest value proposition of leadership is not safety, it's progress. We want things to be better. We're not saying we need to be reckless, but I'm saying the height of leadership is not safety, it's progress. Are we moving forward? Are we becoming better? Are things around us coming to life? Are we seeing an improvement in our society? Are we seeing an improvement in our companies, in the people around us? That's the ultimate value proposition of leadership. Things must become better. People must become better. The burden of every leader ultimately, it's not just to avoid deterioration, but it's to constantly achieve improvement and progress. But I want us to consider this thought. I think it is grossly erroneous to think that we can attempt to separate someone's leadership from themselves. It's actually impossible that we can think of your output as a leader outside of zoning into your person and yourself and your makeup and your state as a leader. It's dishonest leadership to want to propagate principles or to propagate a vision that is not a reflection of the individual that you are. And I think this is probably one of the greatest problems that we have in the leadership space, that we have leaders who say or who point to a certain direction, but that is not a reflection of their persons. That is not a reflection of themselves. It's not a reflection of what they are in their spaces. Ultimately, when broken people are going to lead, inevitably they're going to break things. But when transformed people lead, inevitably they are going to transform people. They're going to transform spaces. They're going to improve things. And yes, it's a function of the principles that they're putting out and probably the ecosystems that they build. But all of that flows from the wealth of the individuals that they are. And I want us to zone into the idea of self, right? Because I think self-leadership is one of the fundamental and foundational pillars of leadership as a whole. It's unfair to expect someone who has not gotten their self-leadership right. Their self-governance is nowhere to be found. It's unfair to expect that person to turn out in a space and lead excellently. Ultimately, the spaces that you influence will not necessarily become what you're saying of them, but they will become what you are as a leader. And we probably are not putting enough attention to deal with the individual, to deal with the self, to deal with the person whom we are saying must step up as a leader. What is it in their self ecosystem that needs to be gotten right? And that I think that's one thing that needs to be fixed at this pediatric level. I think let's fix it at the very core and very basic elementary ideas about what leadership is all about. And I'm going to touch on probably just two concepts around how to work with self in developing self-leadership to make for excellent leadership. There are many self-prefixed words that come into play in this conversation. I mean, self-concept, self-awareness, self-confidence, self-discovery, self-regulation, self-governance, so many self-whatevers. And I think they are scattered across the leadership life cycle. But I think there are some that are fundamentally important in the pediatric space. And I'm going to touch on self-discovery today. What is the essence of self-discovery? My view on why self-discovery is extremely crucial in the leadership conversation is that, first and foremost, let's acknowledge that self-discovery is an admission that you did not participate in the conversation that made you born or alive. Whether from a metaphysical point of view or from a practical point of view, you were nowhere near your parents when they were deciding to, from a spiritual point of view, you were not there when God was deciding, let us make people. So the idea of self-discovery suggests that you don't have as much information about yourself because at the conceptualization level, your inputs were not there because you were not there. So there's a high need that you come to a place where you find out what is this thing. And by what is this thing, I mean you. Because you didn't form part of the conceptualization conversation. I mean, a 1-year-old probably does not know that they are alive. or a 6-month-old, or a 2 weeks old baby. They don't even know that they're alive. They have no comprehension. But as then you begin to grow, you then begin to I'm a human being, right? And you begin to realize and you begin to find out some of the core things about yourself. Over and above just learning basic humanity, how society functions, how people function, which is a lifelong lecture, quite honestly. But there's this elementary function of leadership that I think is so crucial, that it involves the individual finding themselves and discovering themselves and finding out what is it that they're passionate about. What is it that they're passionate about? How do you feel about certain things? We actually discover how we feel about things. We discover what is it that we love, what is it that we like, what is it that we can do, what is it that we cannot do, what is it that we almost gravitate to? What is it that we never find ourselves in? And obviously there's an interplay there of environment, to say, as you were growing up, what have you been exposed to? There's a place for that, but there's also an elementary space of you just discovering natural things about you. What are your passions? What makes you angry? What is it that energizes you? You did not make those things up. Those are things that you find in the conversation where we are doing self-discovery. And I think this is extremely crucial, because this then becomes probably one of the first pointers to areas where you need to apply yourself and grow competency in. Because when you've grown a competency around that area, that's what then becomes the ticket for your influence. And in the coming episodes, I keep throwing things in the coming episodes, but in the coming episodes, I intend to talk about competence and influence, because I think for most of us, we find influence easy when we come into a space where we probably hold a competence that is limited to us in that space. So I come into a space and there's a competency that I bring, and I'm the only one who can bring in that competency. It then becomes easy to lead in that space. But we somewhat struggle to lead when we either don't have a competency, or we are not the only people who propose that competency. What does leadership look like when I'm leading people who have what I have and who can do what I can do? I'm gonna touch that as we go, because I think it probably sits somewhere there by juvenile and adolescence. But in the conversation of self-discovery, when you then pay attention to your passions and your natural inclinations and the things that you are curious about, this becomes the first pointers to direct you to say, what is it that you're probably supposed to focus on first, so that you can build a competency around those things, and then that will become the initial ticket to your leadership. And probably you are not always at the forefront of that conversation. At times, our principals, the people who are ahead of us, our guardians, our parents, our managers, our sponsors, they tend to see those things in us before we even see them. But sometimes it does happen that I discover this thing about myself that I naturally gravitate to. In the self-discovery conversation, I want to propose that let's focus on those things that we're passionate about. Why is this crucially important? This is important because I think we're living in a very distracted age where it is not so attractive to have a core. Everyone and anyone wants to be everything to everyone at every point. There's a gross lack of focus in our times, where I think what I would call the traditional ideology of purpose is downplayed and underplayed. And I think it's extremely crucial that in as much as you are multifunctional and you can do many things, I think it's so important in the scope of leadership and influence that there's this core thing about you that you find and you build a strong competency around. And I don't want to relegate this conversation of self-discovery to far ahead in the leadership life cycle. I think let's fix it here in the pediatrics, because it becomes the launch pad for your leadership. I know a competency in one area does not necessarily mean a competency in another area. So competencies don't necessarily cross-pollinate. Even in my own leadership journey, I've seen how competency in one area stimulates confidence that overspills and becomes a launch pad for building competency in another area. So when I know I'm good at something and I'm going into a space where I probably still don't have a competency as yet, the background and the backdrop of me knowing what I already can do becomes a very good push for me to be secure in what I'm learning to do. And my leadership is not found wanting. So my self-confidence is not found wanting, because even though I'm engaging myself in something that I cannot do, there's something that I can do that I'm very aware of, and it has positively contributed to my confidence matrix. That plays a big part in your leadership, because it you know how people speak of feel good hormones, like when you do something, then there'll be, what do they call it? Is it dopamine? There's a hormone that comes up and just does you something. Though the leadership ecosystem also works like that. There are certain areas, certain attributes about yourself that are ignited when you access certain spaces. I think the pediatrics, actually, the pediatrics, juvenile, and adolescent stages of leadership are somewhat highly dependent on exposure. And even this, on the pediatrics, as we're talking about self-discovery, the level of exposure that you get to things plays a very big part of your self-discovery. To say, the more you get exposed to things at an earlier age, the more advantaged you are to then discover what is this core. But again, I think something else about self-discovery, the self-discovery stage, or the self-discovery aspect of your personal leadership, is going to be undercut if you do not appreciate the process of self-challenge. You must come to terms with, or you must fall in love with the idea of challenging yourself. Comfort does not really do well in leadership. Seeking comfort is not a good trait in building leadership. I think there's a high premium to being in love and adopting an attitude of always wanting to challenge yourself. So this to say, in as much as I've built a core, and these are basics of leadership. This is not like advanced. This is like extremely basic. In as much as you've built a core and you know that there's something that you can do, and I constantly keep on honing it, growing it, improving it, but there must be an element of always wanting to do something that I cannot do. I know repetition and doing the same thing over and over and over again will ultimately make you extremely impactful in whatever you do. There's a space for that, and I agree with that. But there's also a space in the self-discovery aspect of your leadership that you must be in love with the idea of doing something that you cannot do, because that you afford yourself the opportunity to light up more and more bulbs internally that then feed into your makeup of the value proposition that you are as an individual. And I think it's one thing that is nerve-wracking. It's one thing that is uncomfortable. It's one thing that is, I think, is probably scary to put yourself out there and try out things that you cannot do. Even though you fail, but there's a leadership lesson that you would have gotten. There's a muscle that you would have built. There are many other selves that I will not touch on. So I thought, let me touch on self-discovery alone. But here's one last fundamental aspect of leadership that I think sits in the pediatrics of leadership. I did mention in the previous episode that the pediatrics of leadership also deals with what are some of the non-negotiable principles of leadership that you must come to believe. And I think one of the non-negotiable principles of leadership at the pediatric stage of leadership that you must adopt is leadership by serving, leadership by service. This is servanthood leadership. It's an ideology of leadership that you must adopt as a leadership mantra at the pediatric stage of leadership, because across the leadership life cycle, that's what leadership will grow to become. It will always be about serving other people. It will always be about serving a cause. I know leadership is also about self-actualization, becoming everything you are supposed to be. It's also a journey in that respect. But there's no stage in leadership that is devoid of service to others and service to causes. This is why I think it's extremely crucial, and why I think it's probably a superior principle, the idea of leadership by service. I think human beings, somewhat naturally, are more inclined to be self-serving, to be selfish, and to be concerned only with themselves. That is probably the natural inclination to you and I. Like if we were to leave you by yourself, you would turn out extremely selfish. You would turn out extremely self-centered. And I'm not saying probably, I'm like letting you know, me too, myself involved. Outside of environments that teach us, people that teach us, being exposed to superior principles, we are going to turn out extremely selfish. And that is why, even though these principles are readily available in our society, we still have people who are extremely selfish, even still knowing that we shouldn't be self-centered. It's a natural inclination of the human soul to want to be concerned with self. Basic example of this is that children have to be taught to be generous. Children have to be taught to be grateful. You teach a child to say thank you. You teach a child to share what you give them to other children. It's because the natural inclination of our human souls is that we are not wired to come out thinking of the next person. It's a peculiar ideology that we put on as we grow, because we acknowledge that it's better to be concerned about the next person. So with that sort of like understanding, to say we are more inclined to be self-centered, we are more inclined to be selfish, we are more inclined to just be concerned about ourselves. A leadership that is founded on service says, my understanding of the world has grown beyond the natural inclination. So it says, I acknowledge that I'm probably self-centered, I'm selfish, concerned about myself, I'm self-serving, but I've come in contact with a principle that is higher than what is natural, which is to say, my eyesight is able to look beyond me and look at the next person and be concerned and be dedicated to serve them and make their experience better. A position of servant or leadership that is predicated on service is a testament of a higher level of thinking in terms of leadership. It's a testament of a better way of leading. It's not inferior. It's a better way of leading. And on any day in the leadership debate, you will always be a much more effective leader when your leadership makeup is around principles of serving, because you have defeated the natural inclination to always look inward, but you are now able, you have the expensive stamina to look beyond you and want to serve the next person. It returns as a very beautiful sight to behold, to say you are able to defeat what is natural to the human being, but is actually detrimental to the human family. I'm able to look beyond myself and I'm able to serve the next person. This is not a manipulative type of leadership. This is the leadership principles that makes your leadership much more pure, much more honest, much more palatable, much more effective, much more relatable. And I think this is a principle that must be fixed at the pediatric level of your leadership, to say, let's not even begin this leadership journey without understanding the fact that as a leader, I serve. So I'm willing to serve a cause. I'm willing to serve my fellow people. I'm willing to serve my organization. I'm willing to serve my colleagues. I'm willing to serve my company. I'm willing to serve any environment that I find myself in. I'm willing to put my life on the line, to put myself on the line, my gifts on the line, my potential on the line, to make sure that something or someone becomes better. There's always a tension around self-worth and servanthood. Probably to say it's convenient to be someone very servanthood or 70, looking for a word, or inclined to serve when there's a poor self-worth matrix. It's convenient. Many people do fall into that, where you are most likely auctioning yourself because you don't think beyond that you have anything to offer. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a servanthood that is built on knowing that you as an individual are a value proposition. So I've got a set of potentials, I've got a set of talents, I've got a set of abilities. I'm valuable, but I'm giving myself to contribute that value, not from a place of wanting to affirm myself, but from an affirmed place to say, this is what I carry, this is what I have, this is what I know I can do, and I'm willing to give it to the next person to make their experience better. The element of service must not come from a deficitary point of view, but it must come from an empowered point of view where your potential map and your value proposition is well appropriated and can be well articulated by yourself. And having known that, you still make the decision to offer what you are to make someone or something better. I've done a series on deficits. Go check it out. In the coming episodes, I should be having a guest to go just to double click on what does practical pediatrics of leadership look like. And beyond that, we'll be proceeding with the 5 stages of the leadership life cycle. And I hope to hear from you so that we can engage more and continue to build content around leadership essentials. I will see you on the next episode. For now, I am out. Boom.